For this class, I'm going to show how to hand sand the passenger side headlight over here, which is incredibly cloudy and oxidized. This thing is a 2003 Toyota 4Runner. It has almost 300,000 miles on it, and the owner absolutely loves it and plans on driving it till it dies on the road. So it may not look really good, but it's still important to have the headlights look clear so that he can see where he's going with his family at nighttime. But also, this made a great demonstration because these headlights are rather large and in horrible, horrible shape. So it's going to make a dramatic before and after demonstration. To get started, I want to talk about some old internet rumors and stuff. So this is some Crest toothpaste. And, you know, a lot of people say, hey, you can clean headlights with Crest toothpaste or any brand of toothpaste. And that may be true if they're not too bad, but the only way that's going to happen is if you have a really powerful tool, something like this. So this is a wool pad on a rotary polisher. And this has some power, but you got to keep in mind fibers are a form of abrasive, so the fibers working with the Crest would be doing the cutting, not just the toothpaste. Anyway, I just think it's funny. A lot of people try to fix their headlights with toothpaste, and can it be done? If they're not too bad, but it really requires the right pad and the right tool, not a tool, you know, like this or rubbing by hand. You're not going to get anywhere with that. Okay, so for the hand sanding aspect, what I have here, and this is kind of cool, is Harbor Freight has recently introduced a complete hand sanding and machine sanding line of sanding papers and sanding discs. So this means pretty much in any town across America, if you don't have what are called wet dry sandpapers, you can run down to Harbor Freight and get what you need, inexpensively priced. So I got the whole collection starting with 320 grit, 400 grit, 600 grit, 1000 grit, 1200 grit, 15 and 2000 grit. So pretty much every grit you could ever need for under 40 bucks. So one thing I just want to show you is when you buy these things, they come in 9 by 11, so like a standard sheet of paper. And the reason for that is because in the industry, most hand backing pads are meant to use a half a sheet. So the first thing you got to do is you got to pull one out and you got to cut it in half. Now, I've already taken and cut each one of those grits up into their own individual sanding disc, but I just want to show you how I did this because you want to get it right because you want 100% coverage over your hand sanding pad with the sandpaper. So what I do is I just take the sandpaper, I fold it in half, and then crease it like that. And I'm going to take an ink pen, and I'm just going to take and I'm going to run down and put a little mark with an ink pen so I can see where to cut it with my scissors. So that would look like this. Just taking. How come my ink pen's not working, Yancey?
Because you're live.
Oh my gosh. And that's a Flex ink pen, so hey, Flex. Well, the ink pen makes it a lot easier to see the exact line, but anyway, after you make your line, then you take your scissors, you just want to follow and cut that so you have two equal sizes, two equal sheets of sanding paper that will fit on your hand backing plate, so just like that. Okay, and that was a sheet of 1200. So that's how I do it. You can come up with your own way, but it's something you got to do when you buy full sheets of sandpaper. At some point, you got to cut them. Okay, now, when we talk about doing headlight correction, these are some, what I call naked plastic or bare plastic. So all it is just pure plastic. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because some of your more higher end cars, and especially nowadays, now that technology's progressed, is headlights are coming with what they call an OEM, original equipment manufacturer. So OEM clear coats on them. And those clear coats, they help stop the oxidation that affects the plastic. But the clear coats themselves are very, very hard. And I just know this from firsthand experience. If you've got clear coat, if you've got the OEM clear coat failure taking place to a set of headlights, the only honest way to fix those is completely sand that coating off, okay? And then you're down to bare plastic like these, and then you can buff out the plastic and put a headlight coating or some other alternative to seal and protect them. But the point I want to make is because those OEM coatings are so hard, in order to sand all the way through it in a timely manner, you're actually going to need something like I got here, the 320 grit, or here's the 400 grit. And these are very aggressive sanding papers. So just keep that in mind if you're doing headlight correction and you look at the headlight and it looks like it's got a rash. Usually what that is that's where that coating is disintegrating, and you can see patches where there's no coating, but patches where there's still some coating, usually a jagged line that kind of separates them. And you're going to need to sand 100% of that OEM coating off to do a proper headlight correction. We got fortunate. This is an older car. These headlights are just pure plastic. And the thing about that is because they're not as hard as that OEM coating, they're a lot easier to sand and a lot easier to buff, okay? So the next thing you want to do, and I've taken, and I said it earlier, I've already cut all my sandpapers up. Now, the lower grits, this is the 400 and 320, these are dry sanding only. But the higher grits, 600 to 2000 here, these are wet dry. So I got some water here, so I'm going to go ahead and dunk them in there. And it always helps just to put a few drops of soap in there. What the soap does is it acts as a lubricant as you're sanding, and it also helps the face of the sandpaper from clogging, loading up with the particles coming off the headlights as you sand it. So that's why you want to do that. Now when it comes to a backing pad, you need something to wrap that sandpaper around. This is an old school style. This is the Meguiar's. They call this the E-7200. And what it is, it's a rigid foam with the flat sides, obviously, and that's what you want. You want a flat side to put your sandpaper on. And these work really well. They're fairly inexpensive. Down at Harbor Freight, you will see something like this. This is called a traditional hard block, and you pull these rubber feet up here, and you can trap that paper in these little pokey sharp like nails in there, and then you can sand with it. The problem is this is designed to sand flat panels on car body panels, like this Can-Am over here. And most of your headlights have a curve or a radius to them. So will it work? It'll kind of work, but it's not very flexible like the ones that I'm showing you right here. Okay, so that's how you do that. Now, when you get ready to sand, this is really important. You want to tape off any adjacent paint. So if you accidentally run your hand, or if you're doing this by machine, which I'm going to show you next, if you accidentally run that sanding disc or sanding paper over the clear coat, it's important to have it protected, because modern clear coats are thinner than a Post-it note. If you grab a Post-it note, hold it between your finger and your thumb, that's around 3 mils. The factory clear coat is thinner, it's 2 mils. And if you take a piece of 400 or 600 or 800 grit and accidentally sand that car paint, the process to refine that deep sanding mark so you can actually buff it out means you're going to pretty much guaranteed go through the clear coat. So it's really important to go ahead, like I've been doing here, and place what I consider the safe way is 2 layers of tape. So if you do hit it, the first layer will kind of sacrifice itself. You still got a layer there to protect it. And I want to show you something about tapes real quick here. I've got 3 common tapes here. I've got the 3M green painter's tape. I've got the Scotch blue painter's tape. I've got the frog tape right here for sensitive surfaces, the yellow tape. And I've also got the Scotch brand for delicate surfaces tape. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because just 2 weeks ago, I was up on a real popular Facebook group, and someone had posted a picture of the headlights where they did the right thing. They taped off around it. They sanded the headlights, corrected them. They came out perfect. They go to pull that tape off, and they pulled the paint off the car. So now instead of making a profit detailing somebody's car and doing the headlight correction, now they're stuck with turning this into insurance or working out some other kind of deal to get the paint around that headlight repainted. So I just think it's a good idea because you don't know, this person here, he couldn't tell if it was a repaint or factory paint. If it's factory paint, that would probably never happen. But if it's been repainted, you can run into what they call adhesion problems. So the body shop didn't correctly apply the primer or the base coat of the paint. You go to pull it off, and you pull a lot of the paint off at the same time. So what I've been doing is I've just been kind of, even though this is the hand sanding side, it is possible I could get going so fast I could run my hand off the headlight and into the paint. So you want to go ahead and tape that off and protect it. Okay, so the next tip I want to show you is instead of taping off all this paint on the hood, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lift the hood, and that moves the paint away from the headlights. So now I don't got to worry about hitting any of this paint or spending the time to tape it off, because I'm just going to take and wedge this in there so now the paint is far away from the headlights. So there's no risk of sanding any of this top paint like that. So that's a real good way to tackle that. Also, in our classes, I teach what's called extreme prep wash, which includes a wet wash engine detail. So there's 2 kinds of engine detail. There's cosmetic and there's wet wash. Wet wash is when you use degreasers, brushes, a pressure washer to really get an engine clean. In our classes, what I show is you do the headlight correction first, open up the hood, so you don't have the paint next to the headlight, but then you're going to throw splatter over the engine. So what I teach everybody to do is do the headlight correction first, then clean the engine, and you'll remove all that splatter as you do the engine. If you do the engine first and then the headlights, now you got to come back and clean the engine. And then I got one more little technique. If you're working on a car, excuse me while I walk off camera here.
I got you.
If you're working on a car that already has a nice engine compartment, you're gonna do the headlights. If you want to avoid spray, I always keep a set of old bath towels around here and just cover up portions of the engine compartment with an old bath towel. And again, now you just saved yourself time by not having to come back and clean what I call splatter dots. So splatter dots are going to be from when you're sanding by machine, or if you're polishing, you tend to throw splatter everywhere through centrifugal force. So here's just a little cheater technique to help you, just to cover that up. And then this engine's really gross looking, but sorry, Nick. But the point is, I'm trying to teach you how to do something to help you out. Okay, so there you go. Okay, so this first thing I'm going to do, because these are bare naked or just solid plastic, there's no OEM coating, I'm going to reach down here and I'm going to start with my most aggressive wet dry paper, which is 600 grit. Okay, so here's some 600 grit right there. And then I'm going to grab my backing pad. And there's two ways. Here's another little technique for you, tips and techniques. Okay, so a lot of people, there's two ways to do this. Some people like to fold, some people like to wrap. So folding technique is you take your sandpaper, fold it in half, and then you wrap that piece around your backing plate, and that's how you're going to sand. The wrapping technique is when you actually take and you wrap the entire sheet around the backing plate, and then you're ready to sand. It doesn't matter which one you do, it's personal preference. I've always been a wrapping kind of guy. Okay, then I want to take and I'm going to come over here. And Yancey, we're going to be sanding on this right here. So the first thing I want to do is I just want to come down here and I got some spray lube here. And then just start sanding. Now, this isn't a slow motion. You actually want to get what's called inertia working for you. The fact that you get your hand moving back and forth just helps you to sand faster, more effectively. If you go slow, a lot of times that sandpaper will grab the plastic and then your hand stops. So inertia just helps you to have that smooth, even sanding action taking place. Okay, so that looked like this. And you can see all this yellow plastic dripping down as I sand this thing down. You can also see it on the paper, sandpaper. And I'm pushing, people always ask me, how hard are you pushing? I'm probably pushing against this about 15 to 20 pounds of downward pressure. So I'm pushing hard, I'm moving my hand fast. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to engage the abrasives with the plastic, which causes them to abrade it and pull little tiny pieces of plastic off. That's how you take off the old dead oxidized plastic to reveal fresh, new, clear plastic. Okay, looking good here. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and wipe off here. We'll check this out. And I've still got some yellowing over here and over here where I haven't sanded this much. This here is actually starting to look pretty clear though. The yellowing's gone. So I'm gonna come back over here, change my paper out. Let me throw some lube on there. And for this, I'm gonna switch over this side because I just wanna be careful. I'm gonna come give this some focused attention around this radius edge here. And the key to doing this right and getting the best results starts with the first step, okay? If you don't remove the defects, or in this case, the defects are oxidation, yellowing, with the first step, chances are the follow-up steps probably won't do as good a job because you're gonna be using a less aggressive sanding disc. So now I wanna come down here, I wanna put a little focused attention right down here. Okay. And to me, that looks pretty good. So there's my first grit. That's 600 grit. I'm done with this. Now I'm going to move to the next grit. And in the Harbor Freight line, at least I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen the 800. So the next one is 1,000 grit. So we're going to jump from 600 to 1,000. And of course, feel free to source your own sandpapers. And if you can find those in-between grits like 800, it's just always a good idea to go from one grit to the next grit as you refine to make the buff out faster and easier. Okay, so now we got the 800 grit on here, or the 1000 grit, sorry. And now this is also important. At this point, I've got 600 grit sanding marks, which are pretty deep. So I need to refine those to 1000 grit. And so a good rule of thumb is sand twice as long each time you move up in grits. And that way you ensure that you've removed all the deeper scratches to leave the more shallow, refined scratches. And when you're sanding, this is a technique I teach in our detailing classes. We got one coming up in a few weeks. But when you're sanding, you want to move over just a little bit at a time, like a 1/4 inch at a time. You don't want to be making what I call M's or W's, or it's gonna look weird. So you just want to creep over just like this, just a little bit at a time. And I never really time myself. I just kind of go by experience. But another thing that you can tactically feel is as you're sanding, if you pay close attention, you can kind of tell when the surface goes from the 600 grit to the 1000 grit, because the whole plastic headlight just starts to become a lot smoother. And you feel that as you're sanding it. The sandpaper is gliding more than it's cutting because it's getting more and more smooth. And of course, now that I've removed all the yellowing, what I'm pulling off is white because the oxidation's already been removed. Okay, let's see how that looks. Okay, so it looks kind of ugly and hazy, but we're getting there. Okay, so then the next thing would be to jump up. In their line, the next grid is 1500. Here's the 15. Again, I'm just going to take and wrap that around my hand backing pad. And usually what I do is I take my thumb and my fingers and I'll put it on the side like that. Okay, so I got a grip on the vertical sides. Then I'll take these 3 fingers and I use those to push down on the face of this to spread the pressure of my hand out. But I got a good hold on it. And when sanding a car, one of the things that helps you to stand next to, say, a body line, like right here between the hood and the front here, is if you put your thumb or your pinky on the sides here, you can actually feel where that edge is at, and it helps you to keep from standing on the edge because your finger's on there. Okay. Okay, so we're refining 1000 to 1500 grit. And it's been a while since I've done this, and now I remember why I do this by machine. It's a lot of work. But like I say, if you're just an enthusiast, do-it-yourselfer, maybe you don't own any type of polisher, then you can do this 100% by hand. And it's always a good idea to stand in straight lines. You don't want to sit here and make circles. You'll just create a scoured mess that'll be more time consuming and require more elbow grease to fully remove them. So here's an observation, and I'm not sure what you can see on camera there, but now that I'm at 1500 grit, this headlight's actually starting to become clear again. So as you work up in grits and you refine the depth of your sanding marks from deeper to more shallow, it starts to restore clarity to the plastic. This actually works with glass too, I've done a lot of glass sanding and polishing, and the same thing happens. I remember one time I sanded down a glass headlight or a back window for a 1970 Superbird. This was last summer. And I started out with 180 grit and worked my way all the way up to 4000 grit. And after the 180 grit, that glass was very frosty looking, very opaque. That's because of the sanding scratches. By the time I got to 4000 grit, it looked like I didn't even need to polish it. It was looking so clear. And you can find that article up on the Dr. Beasley's blog. You could probably Google glass polishing 1970 Plymouth Superbird, add my name, Mike Phillips, and that blog will pull right up. And if you've ever wondered how to pull scratches out of glass, I kind of document that whole thing. And we have multiple videos on the Dr. Beasley YouTube channel on glass polishing. Okay, so this is really key. This is that point that you do not want to skimp. You want to make sure you've completely refined the previous sanding marks to the sanding grit that you're using now, just to make the buff out faster and easier and more complete. Okay, so that's 1500 grit, and it's actually getting fairly clear. So then the next step, at least in the Harbor Freight line, the highest they go for their wet dry papers is 2000 grit. They do make sanding discs that go to 3000 grit, but this demonstration is just how to hand sand. Okay, so there's my 2000 grit. Little lubrication there. The lube I'm using is actually Dr. Beasley's Prep Wash. Works pretty good for a lot of things. Okay, so now refining to 2000 grit. Got it? This is kind of some of the behind the scenes stuff you don't ever get to see when you're making a video, but it's capturing the still shots for an article. I could always go back in, I've done this before, and freeze the video and take a screen grab and then turn that into a picture, but it's usually not as in focus as you like. And as I'm sanding this now, it's actually really gliding. Okay, so we've worked those sanding marks up to be so fine and refined that the sanding paper is just starting to really glide over the surface. Okay, let's see how that looks. Okay, looks good to me. That's 2000 grit. Okay, so the next step will be to remove your sanding marks. And I'm going to show you how to do that with an entry-level tool. This is a Harbor Freight 6-inch DA. I put a 5-inch backing plate on it. Perhaps you saw the grease mod we did, where we took this apart and put in a higher quality lithium grease to quiet it down, but also smooth it down a little bit, the felt vibration, and it did work. But I'll show you how to do that. But first, I'm going to show you how to actually take these out by hand. So in our car detailing classes, I teach wet sanding by hand, dry sanding by machine, and I always demonstrate to the class how to actually pull your sanding marks out by hand, just in case if you're working on a car and you get into a tight area where you can't get any kind of a buffer, you can pull them out with your couple fingers in a towel. Now for this, I'm using terry cloth. So this is just a simple washcloth I bought at it's Walmart, like 77 cents a piece. But the reason I'm using this to pull sanding marks out is because this has what's called a nap. It's a cotton loop of material, and it's actually more aggressive than microfiber, so it gives my product a little bite. Now this is a product that we're launching at Mobile Tech Expo, basically tomorrow. I'll have it tomorrow at MTE with me. And the names have been not released yet, so I just have Lab Sample B on here. But this is a much more aggressive version of our NSP polishes. So here's a little bit on the towel. And I'm just going to do a little section here to show you the technique. But kind of like sanding, you don't rub like this. You put a little passion behind the towel, or what I call elbow grease. Well, we all call elbow grease, but I call it putting a little passion. But I'm pushing hard. This is at least 20 pounds of pressure. Moving my hand fast because I have to try to abrade that plastic and level those sanding marks till that plastic is absolutely smooth. And if you look, I'm doing what's called an X pattern. Okay, so I don't want to just rub in the direction of the sanding marks, you'll leave ruts. So I'm kind of doing an X pattern, and that should flatten this out a lot faster than just rubbing in straight lines. Okay, wipe that off. Boom. There you go. So I just showed you how to hand sand and correct headlights and how to hand polish, in case you don't have a polisher. But let me throw a microfiber pad on here. Now this is a Buff and Shine. This is their white cutting pad. And for the same reason that I just talked about using terry cloth to pull my sanding marks out, I'm starting out with fiber because, again, fiber is a form of abrasive. Okay, so it gives it more cut than a foam pad. So I'll put just a little bit on here like this. Come down here, we'll finish this out with a Orbital polish. So much easier to work by machine than work by hand. Okay, so see how that looks. Oh, mucho better. Mucho better. Now, let me make a couple comments about what I just did there. So this is kind of an entry-level tool. You can pick this up for around 60 bucks at Harbor Freight. They call it a 6-inch DA polisher, but technically that's the wrong way to describe it. They call it a 6-inch DA polisher because it comes with a 6-inch backing plate, which has nothing to do with the action of the tool. This is a 8mm free-spinning random orbital polisher. So it's a short stroke polisher, and a lot of times you can see that stroke, you'll see it, turn it on, you got an inner perimeter and an outer perimeter, and that space between them is the millimeter of the orbit stroke. It's a lot easier to see with the foam pad on there, which maybe I'll show you that next. But anyway, and then, of course, the age-old problem with any tool that's what's called a free spinning polisher. So here's free spinning. I can take my hand and freely spin the backing plate. It's not gear-driven. Is if you don't hold this thing completely flat to the surface, it stalls out. That means if you're trying to sand with one, you're not sanding. If you're trying to polish with one, you're not polishing because the pad just basically vibrating. So that then you can try to do things like adjust how you hold it, turn the speed up, change to a fresh pad. Okay, that was lab sample B. I'm going to come over here to lab sample A. Shake well before use. And the reason I'm repolishing, and I see a lot of guys skip this with a foam pad on a DA, is just because it's going to maximize the clarity of the plastic by removing the fiber dynamic and getting down to foam, which if you look at a foam pad has a uniform flat surface. And that's how come a foam pad can refine things better than a fiber pad, because fiber pads have individual fibers cutting that surface, putting their own scratches in. Okay. Then, of course, wipe that residue off. And then we're going to put the Dr. Beasley's Headlight coating on here, which is a ceramic coating for plastic. And then this one will be finished. I can go ahead and pull the tape off. It's already kind of got loosened up by the water running around on it. So another good reason to put at least 2 layers on, because if you're doing anything wet, a lot of times the sandpaper will loosen up. And it's kind of one of the things I've learned in life is when sanding paper loosens up, and you remove it, you ain't getting fresh stuff down because now it's all full of gunk. Okay, so that is how you hand sand. I showed you how to remove your sanding marks by hand, and then also using a very entry-level DA polisher that if you bought a tool like that to do your headlights, you could also polish out the whole car, so you get more use out of it. Okay, so let me get the headlight coating. Okay, so here's the Dr. Beasley's headlight coating. The first aspect of this is to go ahead and use the headlight prep. And that's just going to make sure this thing is completely surgically clean. And I think what we recommend for something like this is 2 layers, and you want to wait, I think, around 30 minutes in between each layer. So now that I've prepped it, here's the Dr. Beasley coating. I've already got a applicator block already ready to go here. And then, just like anything else, you know, you can cross hatch it. If you want to go in circles, go in circles. The important thing is just to get the coating on there and cover every square millimeter. Okay. And then I think you wait like 30 seconds. You can go ahead and wipe off the excess. Then we're going to let that sit there and cure and set up, and I'll go over and show you how to machine sand the fast way. I'm going to guess that's been, what, 20 seconds, Nancy? 30 seconds? And I saw a high spot there. So anytime you're using coatings, your first initial wipe is called leveling, because you're still spreading that coating out, so you're leveling it, creating a uniform texture. Then, of course, the final wipe, you pull any excess off. Okay, so that was the hard part. As you can see, I'm already kind of sweaty, out of breath. Now let's come over here, and I'm going to show you how to machine sand.